Hello and welcome to the birth of a new dimension. Today it's a beautiful rainy day here where I live, so you probably can hear the sound of the rain falling on the roof up there. But hopefully it's not too disturbing to be able to listen to the rest of this broadcast. So my name is Aurora. This show is called Birth of a New Dimension, and the new dimension, to which I am referring to when I say that we're collectively and as individuals giving birth, is the end result of bringing together the formerly divergent realms of physical matter, like dense matter, and the contrast of what we would define as pure energy or pure consciousness, or even which we could define as spirit. So up until this point, we've been having the human experience for about the past 5,000 years or so of defining the world as a duality, where we have the internal realm, the interior, everything that's inside of your epidermis, in contrast with your context. And this duality is part of our basic biological nature in its present format. We have duality as part of our visual perception, and most of us are highly visually oriented, where not only the functioning of the cells of the retina work on contrast, but also we have two eyes. Most of us are binocular, and we do these complex on-the-fly calculations between the viewpoint of IA and IB, and the system of perception in your brain does these calculations in order to tell depth. And so if you want to reach out to your glass of juice and you need to see where is it on the table, what you do is contrast the two viewpoints of I1 and I2. And this is, lots and lots of duality in our basic biological architecture. And the shape that I have invented, that is called the flying rainbow lasagna. And you can see an example of what a flying rainbow lasagna looks like just by looking at the UCY the banner, the image that's associated with this show. There's a big fat flying rainbow lasagna on there. Or if you want to delve a little deeper, I invite everyone to go to my website, which is flyingrainbowlasagna.com. It's lasagna with an E on the end. And so I named this shape lasagna. First of all, it was not my intention to make something that was ridiculous sounding at all. I think this really speaks to me being a cultural outsider. P.S. I'm a cultural outsider. Where do I come from? So this is what a lot of today's broadcast is going to be about, the origins of my consciousness. Because sometimes, recently there was a person who was critical of something that I had written on social media, and they were saying, well, Aurora's not even human. And I think they were trying to say it like some kind of insult or something, like you shouldn't listen to me. However, I fully admit and fully embrace, yes, I tell this to everyone every week. I'm not human. Although I'm in a human body and I'm in this human society and I'm living on Earth's surface, interacting with many, many other humans, the origins of my consciousness is the stellar network. So again, I used to describe myself and say I'm a walk-in. Then I started to understand that there's all sorts of different flavors of walk-ins, and people have had many different experiences that they have described as being a walk-in. So in order to set my experience apart, I started to say that I'm a galactic walk-in, because the idea of being a person, like if the original occupant of a physical body dies, I had to understand that there is sometimes another human consciousness, another human ego comes inside. So in order to set myself apart, or to refine the terms, I would say I'm a galactic walk-in. Because, look, I don't come from a planet. It's not like I came from a planet XYZ and I jumped into my clank metal spaceship and I flew millions and billions of miles across the vast interstellar reaches of space and then climbed out of my clank metal spaceship wearing, a spacesuit and a breathing apparatus. That is not what my journey was like at all. And people often during my especially my early years living here on Earth would ask me oh, what planet do you come from? Kind of playfully, lightheartedly or something like that. And for a long time I didn't have the refined language to be able to answer their questions properly. So the real answer is no, I don't come from a planet that is orbiting a star. Mostly what I would say to people that I come from a consciousness collective, like a group of minds. But then people often would misinterpret and they'd say, oh, you're part of a hive mind. You're part of the Borg. And then I'd have to be I had to learn what the Borg was. I'm no. I'm not some horrible, invasive, technology-based hive mind. No, I'm very different than that. So when I say a collective collective consciousness. That means that it's many different individuals who are fitting together to make up the whole in exactly the same way that our physical bodies are made up of trillions of individual cells that all fit together and metabolize and lead to the health and continued, longevity of the entire, overarching organism. That my mind is part of many, many other minds that all fit together and make the health and vitality and, blood pumping, living metabolism of this much larger organism in time. So to make it very clear, I don't use technology. My collective and me personally, we don't use technology. Technology is kind of like we're laughing a little bit, like that's for losers. Not that I'm, a condescending jerk or anything like that, but it's kind of like saying if you need technology to be able to get off the surface of your planet, you're not ready to get off the surface of your planet. That all of these higher endeavors are about self-cultivation, getting to be such an expert and such a virtuoso that you're able to do all of these things that would be considered magical or supernatural or miraculous or, beyond what has been defined as possible. And you do it without any kind of, accoutrements. No accessories are necessary, nothing other than your birthday suit or, your naturally occurring biological form along with life force energy or spirituality or consciousness, like the intangible that animates the physicality. So I travel on a bridge of consciousness, love or unconditional love, the tone of unconditional love. It's like a type of food, and it's also like a type of gas or a fuel that propels my consciousness and my collective of consciousness through time. So once again, this is not about using like on a Star Trek show, dilithium crystals are what powers the Starship Enterprise. It's not about having magic crystals or having a hamster running on a wheel. Like get that hamster to run faster. We need to go into hyperspace. It's nothing like that at all. It is all done through cultivating consciousness and essentially having a connection to what would be called the divine, the higher dimensional source of an organizing principle or intelligence, the great conductor, the great composer, when I say organizing principle, I'm sitting in front of these paintings. I wish you could see them physically through my eyes. I do lots of paintings. You can check them out on my website. The whole idea is I make these highly organized and symmetrical, they look like polygons. They look like, multi-sided shapes and colors. But this is like the musical score of the cosmos. This is the organization or the intelligence within which we are all embedded. And, on a godly scale, I would say I'll take credit for this. However, as an individuated aurora, I can't say I invented this language. I did it. This language has been around for a really long time. It way predates aurora. I perceive this language. So I see it or hear it or sense it with my higher dimensional faculties, my inner vision, and then I translate it into diagrams and drawings and paintings, and more into acoustic, sonic, harmonic expressions, music and voice, in order to express these truths. And secondarily, I express these truths through the flapping of my moving mouth parts here on the radio. No offense I love the radio and I love having my show here. However, language itself is a distortion. It is, I say, it's like a virus that has infected our hacked operating system, and the operating system is known as the human mind. And the human mind is different from insight. It's different from that pure perception that is not clothed with words, and that most people reach either in a trance or after taking some hallucinogen or, during a very long distance run. Mostly people are in their talking mind, and that's their human daily waking intellect. And mostly it takes some effort to be able to transcend the verbalized mind and reach into levels of non-verbal perception and insight. And it's my assertion that that is our true mind before the fall. Before the fall is the fall of the culture of Atlantis, the fall from grace in human biblical mythology, the fall of consciousness from higher levels of organization and perception into what we are presently experiencing, which is a very low level of perception and innate organization. So we're on this journey, like from the lower levels of a ladder, climbing up the rungs, trying to get to higher levels of consciousness. Those higher levels of consciousness are our birthright. It's not something just for special people. It's actually something that each one of us was born into, but we have been artificially separated from. And that level of consciousness where you're connected to everything. You could call it like numinous or oceanic, the way that little infants come into physicality for about the first year of their life, are very connected to this overarching consciousness presence. And then little by little, as little infants download the human operating system and develop their own sense of ego or separation from context, each person gets more and more distanced from the source of their consciousness and the total connectedness. So the collective that I'm a part of is more like beings that are still connected to that totality. So it's not like some kind of communistic hive mind, totalitarian, that's the word I'm looking for. Not like a totalitarian state. So I've had to learn, about human earthly politics, that totalitarianism exists and has existed here and makes people wary and skeptical of any loss of their individuality. And it is well-placed skepticism because, a truck is going by, hold on. What can be considered an legitimate ideal in the abstract realm, in the non-physical realm, when it gets manifested into the physical realm of anthropomorphic social dynamics, can become, horribly distorted. And that's what totalitarianism is. So the whole idea is that we're in the symphony of life. And the symphony is made of many, many different organisms, many different beings that are moving at different rates. Like, the way that sound waves or visual waves or photons can move at different rates and give us different tones or different colors. And all of these consciousnesses are meant to fit together perfectly, like perfect puzzle pieces, even though they're moving at different rates. So we also have to recognize that there are some pathogens that are infecting this larger time field of pure consciousness. So it's like we're saying, I'm just using the analogy of a computer program. I'm not a transhumanist. If we were to say, there's this amazing computer program that's running and it's running so great, but it's got a lot of bugs. There's a lot of problems in the way that it's been running. This is accurate. This is what's going on down here. So there was the original format for both our bodies and our consciousness and our connection or interrelationship to context. And all of that has been distorted or subverted. So before the fall, we were intended to maintain to be an individual down here in your physical container, like in the envelope of your epidermis, but also to maintain your connection to that which is greater. So it's like having, many perspectives at the same time. You're your own individual self with two legs walking around on the surface of the planet, and you're also the planet itself, and you're also all of the other organisms on the planet, and you're also the star that emanated you, and you're also all of the other stars. So that is much more along the lines of what my consciousness collective is like, and the value system that motivates us and motivates me personally is based in unconditional love, and it is promoting the ideal of freedom. And I've said this many times, that freedom is not something, it is a totality state. So it's not something where we can have 99% freedom and then 1% slavery of consciousness. And once you start to understand and see with your own inner vision how profoundly interconnected the flow of consciousness is, you will then begin to understand why there's no way for it to be like, everything is great in the whole rest of the cosmos and 99% of everything is great, but there's just this one little sliver of 1% over here where everyone is horribly imprisoned and tortured, because all of our thoughts and, the way that energy flows is all interconnected. So if you imagine like you've got all of these, like an organism like a bird or something like that can fly Most of the birds can fly wherever they want to, at whatever speed they want to, and land on a branch or make a nest or go wherever they, fly, swim, do whatever they want to. That then there's, whatever, a few little birds that get stuck in a cage and they have to do what their master tells them to do. But you start to see that the flight patterns of all of these birds are being disrupted by the birds that are stuck in the cage. Well, right now on this planet, many, many consciousnesses are quote unquote stuck in the cage. And I won't just give you disheartening information. Like, it's very disheartening and depressing to learn about that. And I used to only speak about this, to formally enrolled students in my class. P.S. Free plug, my class is called Lessons for Full Spectrum Humans. And I used to keep this information until lesson 18. So we would go through like 17 weeks of previous lessons, cultivating the concept of unconditional love, because unconditional love, let's make a clear distinction here. It doesn't mean that you just hug everyone. It doesn't mean I love everyone and everything unconditionally, therefore I want to hug everything. No. What it means is that we accept what we perceive. It's like saying, oh, there's a sour note over there. That sounds terrible. I accept it. I accept it. That's a sour note. There are many sour notes of consciousness, characteristics that are being played in the time field right now that were not part of the original music, that are totally like farts on the stage. Like, you don't want to fart up the stage, but these people are doing it. And this now comes down to the question of consciousness being imprisoned, because the consciousness that is here on this planet, when I say imprisoned, I mean impeded in its flow. Like, if you're a bird and you want to fly from this tree to this tree over here, and you should be allowed to do so. It's part of your birthright as a bird with wings. But if someone cages you, then it means, oh, you're only allowed to fly around in the aviary, in the places you're allowed to go. And this is what is happening on this planet. That consciousness and consciousness as a manifestation and an experience is intimately tied to the behavior of DNA. So DNA is not a flat, static object. It's dynamic and it has a behavior. And it wants to be free in its behavior. Like, you can imagine like a little kid that wants to wiggle all around and dance and, run and play and skip and do all sorts of fun things and hop on one foot. And on this planet, literally, little children are indoctrinated and they're socialized and they're culturally restrained. And you say, no, you're not allowed to do that. Like, sit quietly in your chair. Like, stop wiggling around. Don't take off your socks and shoes. Like, all of these things that we do. It's domestication. We domesticate our little kids so that they then become good domesticated adults. But the whole idea is, if you were free, then your DNA would be able to do whatever dance movements it wants to do, including the dance movements that involve pretty much like an immortal experience in perfect health and vitality, where you don't have to die, but instead can transcend death and can experience, the eternal life, or a journey of consciousness that never has to end. Like, that's what happens if you aren't acculturated like a little kid and made to sit quietly, and cross your legs and clasp your hands together and pay attention in class and everything like that. So just a sec. So I'm describing now the actions of a wild, undomesticated, beautiful, full-spectrum human. And that's what each one of us is supposed to be. And that's what we were designed to be, like the original blueprint or design for our body and our consciousness. And that original blueprint has been really hijacked and distorted. And humans now, in their present state, are domesticated, like diminished. Like the way that there's wild horses that run around and they're like, screw you, I'm going to run around and poop wherever I want to and run wherever I want to. And then there's horses that are like thoroughbred horses. And it's like, no, you live in a stable. You run when we want you to run. Now you sit quietly because I want you to sit quietly. Like, now we're going to, sedate you and put you on a giant aircraft and, fly you to some kind of whatever, like they have these different horse races, different places or whatever. Like, that's not a wild horse at all. It's the same organism, but it is being treated and manifesting its proclivities in very, very different ways. So humans have a wonderful imaginative capacity. Our minds, we like literally create the world with our minds and our perception. However, right now humans have this domesticated mindset that comes from this implantation of the hacked human operating system, and verbalized language is part of that. And I try to describe this to people all the time. That, I use the verbalization. I have to. If you're in this time and place and you're nonverbal, it's very disempowering. Like if you can't use words to describe your desires or your needs or your preferences to other people who do have words will be like, oh, let me just put words in your mouth for you and you like live your life for you. So it's to be able to assert one's own will in this time and place. It's hugely important to be able to speak and to be able to say something like, no, I don't want vanilla ice cream. I want chocolate ice cream. Or no, I don't want to live with you. I want to live with this person over here. Like whatever are your desires. And if you can't speak and express those preferences and desires, other people are all too happy to project their expectations and their desires and their preferences on top of you. So we use these words and language even knowing that it's imperfect. And I think most humans also recognize that language is imperfect, but it's like a necessary tool that we're here stuck using because we're not telepathic. I'm telepathic, but I had to learn that not everybody here is telepathic. So just like, I have so many funny anecdotes about my experience here as Aurora over the past 17 years, but pretty early on in my experience, I worked as a custom framer in several different small, like frame shops where people get their paintings framed. And I started to, when I would work with a customer, someone would bring in a picture or a poster and they'd be like, I want to get this framed. I'd be like, that's cool. Because there's all these different framing options. Do you want to have, a look like this or like this or like this? And I would like flash pictures in their mind. What would it look like with a big giant gold frame? What would it look like with a demure black frame? What would it look like with a colorful mat or with a white mat or with a black mat? And after a little while, I started to understand, like, a lot of people weren't getting my flashes. They were hearing the words from my mouth, but they weren't getting, like, the diagrams that I was sending mentally along with those words. And so I started to get, and like, this might seem like a silly thing to have to recognize, but I had to learn that from direct experience. So, okay, not everybody was able to receive and perceive the inner pictures that I was sending to them. But then some people were able to perceive them. So with the people, I'm like, okay, like this guy's not getting it. I'm like, let me get a sample off the wall and show you what I'm talking about. But to other people, they would be like, oh yeah, like I can imagine that. So we were literally doing this type of consensual, higher consciousness, direct speaking beyond language. And that's what our true mind is. That's what our non-domesticated, true, unfettered, genetic dance and form of consciousness is supposed to be about. It's telepathy. That's not telepathy that is verbalized. So this is a big takeaway from today's broadcast. Like, real telepathy is done on a bridge of love. First of all, you don't need any kind of microchips or magic headbands or anything implanted in your brain to make it happen. It's part of your mind. It's part of your brain already. And we need to cultivate our faculties, just like if you want to be a runner. Like if you just were born and you're a little tiny baby, like you have to learn to crawl, then you have to learn to walk, then you have to learn to run, then you have to learn to run many, many miles, and then you get to be a marathon runner. So with cultivating the higher faculties, like you have to learn to crawl, walk, and run, and then you have to learn endurance and control and, mature in order to do all of this. So it's a lot of self-cultivation, and that's why myself and other non-technology dependent, non-terrestrial beings, they're like, oh yeah, like that guy hasn't done the self-cultivation. He needs like a magical headband to do this. It's a little bit like that guy's not on the same level, because they didn't do the work. And this is all about, it really is a level playing field. It's all about whether each person has done the work in order to achieve the capacities or achieve the abilities. Yeah, so that used to be just part of our innate structure, that everyone was born here in a state of total freedom, still connected to themselves as a divine being, and also embodied as a physical being, and able to be telepathic with all the other wonderful embodied beings here. And this is what would be considered like, the magical world or mythological world of Atlantis, or the Garden of Eden, like a perfect time. And it was also a time when, like in the mythology of the Garden of Eden, nobody had to eat anybody else. They talk about all the different animals that lived in the garden, but no one was eating anybody else. And that's what life was like. It's hard for anybody in this time and place to even imagine or conceive of this. But yeah, death did not exist. We didn't have to kill another organism and chew him up and stick him in our tummy and digest it with a bunch of microbes in order to stay alive. We were able to get direct light from the sun and the stars in terms of physical nourishment and also consciousness nourishment. So like the energy that flows through your neurons is consciousness. And where does that energy come from? I mean, regular earth science right now is totally not prepared to examine this, to ask the right questions, to build the right apparatuses and explore this. Again, I'm not looking down my nose at regular earth science, but it's funny because a lot of science-based or objective materialists have ridiculed or dismissed or condescended to my work. Meanwhile, I'm busy not condescending to the work of scientists of this time and place, because it's very much like, imagine if you, with your present knowledge about technology and the quantum world and the molecular realm, if you went back in time to like the 1300s or, the 1500s, in like a time when, in Europe, when people were very superstitious and the Black Plague was part of life, and they thought like you got the plague because someone cursed you with, with a magic stick or something like that. Imagine if you were trying to speak to the scientists or doctors of that time and be like, no. The plague is caused by tiny, invisible, microscopic organisms that you can't see with your eye. They'd be like, burn him, he's a witch. Like, they wouldn't believe you at all. So that is very much the mindset of science in this time and place, because science cannot yet see with like an apparatus consciousness. Like scientists of 600 years ago couldn't see microorganisms, so they couldn't even tell that there were little tiny pathogens that were making people sick, or in the case of your microbes in your tummy, helping you to stay alive and digest your food. They couldn't perceive it. It wasn't part of their realm. So consciousness is a similar aspect of, in modern day science, something that is not perceived and is under-acknowledged. So that's why science talks about the fabric of space and time. And I always add in consciousness. It's the fabric of space, time, and consciousness. But science has not developed like a measuring stick that can measure how long is your consciousness, or how much does your consciousness weigh, or, what color is your consciousness. None of those things can science measure. So it's like they're not prepared to touch it, talk about it, include it as a variable in any of their explorations. And that's a huge vulnerability. It's like huge hubristic, self-centeredness of science at this moment. Be like, we know all about this stuff, but just don't ask us these hard questions about consciousness. And this also speaks to the idea of afterlife, because, even in that much more superstitious and less science-based time of, 600 years ago or whatever, people had very clear ideas of what is afterlife. Oh, that's the garage. Hold on. So a lot of people had a very religious expectation. Their expectation of afterlife was based in their religious programming. And in our present time, many people have diverged. They don't believe in, the official doctrine of religion and things like that. Some people still believe in afterlife. Many people, they don't even know what afterlife is or what to expect. And science is totally unprepared to tackle the question of afterlife, which has everything to do with measuring consciousness or being able to perceive consciousness and where it's going. So some of the religions from the Far East, like Tibetan Buddhism, some of those practitioners and their lineages have actually been very, we could call it scientific in terms of observation-based research. They've learned a lot about afterlife and consciousness and how consciousness flows. This is the whole idea. Where are you coming from and where are you going to? So in our journey of consciousness, we're supposed to be able to come, be embodied as an organism, like an elephant or a human or a redwood tree, have a bunch of experiences, and those experiences are like food. That's the garage door. Sorry, guys. What motivates my collective? We fly from space-time and, opportunity to the next space-time opportunity. Why do we fly from place to place? What motivates us? What are we doing? So in my personal experience, my agenda here of being Aurora, I was motivated by freedom. And I really perceived that there was not only an egregious lack of freedom on this planet, but that in what was happening to this particular individual and the body of this individual that I'm now in, I was like, that is, part of my French, that is very effed up. Like I won't curse or whatever, but it was very screwed up. I'm like, that is not right. And in the higher dimensional realms, like the way that you really become powerful and the way that you really exert your willpower is not by just standing on the sidelines and being like, oh, tisk, tisk, tisk. That simply will not do. I drop my opera glasses. I clutch my pearls. It's like you get in, you roll up your sleeves, or you actually jump in with both feet, and you do your calculations with your own body. So I say this a lot too. Each one of us in a body. Your body is like your quantum laboratory. It's like the place where you are doing quantum experiments involving consciousness and time and possibilities and probabilities. And you're the researcher, and you're figuring out what happens if I think this, what happens if I do this, what happens if I think this and then I do this, or what if I think this and then I do this. That's what it is, each one of our individual prerogatives, and it's appropriate. And that's also why I don't tell other people what to do. And that's part of my my value system of freedom, because it's also part of like being a good musician or being a good artist or whatever. Like if you're teaching someone else, you want to be like, here are the tools to unlock your own or express your own creativity. I'm not going to tell you how to express your creativity. That's your job. It's your job to figure out what to paint. It's your job to figure out what colors you like, or what style of music you want to play, or what instrument you want to play, or how loud or how soft. So in life, like your body is your instrument and your life is your music, or your life is your manifested painting of your artwork. And it's totally inappropriate for me or anyone else to come along and say, less red, more purple. Like, that ain't right. You know how much red there should be on your painting. You know how much purple there should be on your painting. Just like with your food, you know how much salt or hot sauce or whatever, chocolate sauce you want to pour on top of your food. It's not right for someone else to tell you what to do. So, everything that I'm saying here, this is all expressing my value system as a visitor here. So and it's very different than the social value structure and belief structure of the culture within which I'm embedded at this moment. Like, this is the barbarian culture around here, where people are like, oh yeah, might makes right. That's one of the first things. That's not like, oh, I respect everybody's capacity to make their own choices. If it's like might makes right, what I should do is take everybody's paintbrushes forcefully and make them paint whatever the F I want them to paint. That would be the barbarian value system. So how would everyone here feel if some non-terrestrial invading consciousness came here and was like, screw you all, I'm taking over all of your paintbrushes or your imaginations or your consciousnesses, and I'm going to force you, take away your willpower and force you to paint the paintings or think the thoughts or imagine the things that I want you to imagine. You would be shocked and horrified and probably quite angry. And the truth is, that's already happened on this planet. That is the fall of consciousness. This is what happened in ancient Atlantis. So the whole idea is we had this really divine structure of both body and society and consciousness, before there was this degradation. And then genetic invaders came to this planet, and they inserted themselves against the will of the inhabitants here into the genetic code. It's like getting into people's bodies, like a type of possession or whatever, soul stealing or something like that. And I had to learn, that's why people are so skeptical of me when I say I'm a galactic walk-in. They're like, you're a body snatcher. You've come here uninvited. You are stealing. I had to, so I'm really loving and pretty naive and innocent is a good word. I'm like loving and innocent. And so when people would react in that way, I'd have to stop and consider, like, what are they saying? Is this true? What is happening here? And then I'd have to, ponder everything and be like, no, I know what I'm doing. I know that I'm allowed to be here. So I had to go through all of these considerations and then strengthen myself and say, wait a minute, I know what is really truthful. I know what is really appropriate. And I understand where these concerns are coming from. So just to articulate this really clearly, no, I'm not a body snatcher. I'm not some kind of a hyper-dimensional opportunist that's like, look, that girl down there is dying. I'm going to watch this, guys. I'm going to go down there and steal her body and walk around in it like a puppet. That is so not what I did. What did happen was I saw that there was a literal murder that was happening in terms of destroying the body and the ego structure of the person who was in this body. And I said, that is not fair. And what I did as an abstract stellar presence was I created a solution. And the solution is the shape that I call the flying rainbow lasagna. So it's not some heavy scientific term. It's not like a stellated polygonal, hexagon. It doesn't sound fancy like that. It's true. It's a light-hearted term, but it's not something that is intended to be ridiculed. And when I made that word, I didn't make it understanding how it would be perceived or heard through the filter of other people. Like I'm just a very clear artist. I'm just making things that I'm making without thinking, what will other people think of this? Like, will they like this? What will they think of this color? Like, that's not how I paint. When I make a painting, I'm like, does this painting need more orange? Not, will my audience like a painting with more orange? Maybe there are people that don't like orange. Maybe they only want more green. Like, that is not how I approach the whole creative act. So yeah, it's about integrity. And integrity is not just some kind of thing where it's like, I'm better than others. It's like saying, does your inner impulse match your outer action? So if your impulse and your action match, then you have integrity. Like, I felt this, and then I did the thing that I felt. But I understand that what a lot of people in this time and place do is they sacrifice their integrity. They're like, oh, I felt like, painting a painting or playing the piano, but instead I went to work and did a job that I didn't actually like and enjoy because I got paid money. And so this is everyone that I just said that to, like, who's listening in the regular human society, they're like, yes, Aurora, that is normal. That is the way that life here is structured. It's like, oh, everyone wants to stay home in their pajamas. Nobody wants to go to work. But I don't really think that's true, that everybody just wants to stay home, laying about in their pajamas. I think that's one of the great mispresumptions about humanity. What I really think is truthful is that humanity has been domesticated and enslaved, and their spirit has been broken to the point that they get totally disheartened and just over it all and tired and exhausted, and then they just want to stay home in their pajamas. But that's after many, many decades of their soul being crushed by, the social mechanism of, formal education and then finding work in the system of professional workplace. And I say all of this because there's this great presumption that humans are basically lazy. And if you didn't have to work for money in order to earn your food, you'd all just sit around in your pajamas doing nothing, like eating and farting all day long. And I really think that's not truthful, and I really think that that's not respectful to what humans really are. Not the domesticated form of humans, but what real humans are. So the truth is, like, when you're a little kid, most little kids are interested and curious and engaged all the time. They want to explore. They want to learn new things. They get bored very quickly. They actually don't want to just sit around doing nothing all the time. And even adults, most adults have to work at like some, grueling 9 to 5, 40-hour or plus work week in order to stay alive in this socioeconomic context. And so then many people are simply exhausted during their non-work hours, either the evenings or the mornings or the weekends. But also, despite that exhaustion, many people still do what is called hobbies on the weekends. It's like, oh, I did my 40-hour work week, and now I finally have time to paint a painting or play my guitar or go for a walk or grow something in my garden. So the idea that humans are choosing to do these activities as recreational activities shows that humans are not innately lazy at all. And this is all about how energy is being used and harnessed. So I also had to learn, like when I worked as a custom framer, all right, like my mind was my own. I could think my own thoughts and I could listen to music or, think what I needed to think in my head. What mattered was my output. It only mattered like how many frames I made, how many completed pictures stacked up at the end of the day. It didn't matter what I was thinking with my mind while I made those pictures. And I had to learn in other forms of work or other workplaces that what is expected is not only physical output, like that you make the right number of things, but also that you spend your hours at work thinking work thoughts. And you're not even allowed to think non-work thoughts, quote unquote, while you are, quote unquote, at work. And that was a huge eye-opener to me because I recognized, like, wow, it's not just selling your physical, like, muscular energy. It's not just selling your creative energy because, if you frame a picture, that is creating something. You're like taking ingredients, taking recipes and putting them together. Or if you work in a bakery, it's like you're taking flour and sugar and eggs and putting it together and making cookies. You're you're making stuff with it. That's creative energy. But it was also like a selling or a commodifying of mental energy, of the mind. And especially for some of the higher paying gigs out there, it's like you may not be producing pies or framed paintings. You might be producing sales or, some kind of like business partnership. And that means that you're expected to use your mental energy during those hours that you are at work thinking about work, and you're not allowed to think your own thoughts, and to essentially to be free. Well, this has everything to do with that whole concept of consciousness being free to flow where it wishes to flow in the cosmos. So we've got trapped consciousness here on this planet. That means like you're supposed to be able to incarnate here and do your stuff and then go to the next place when you're done, when you're bored. And many people that I've spoken with here, I also had to learn this. So many people are like, oh, I'm so over it, Aurora. I hate being here. I can't wait to get out of here. I hope this is my last lifetime. They're not looking at it like, oh, it's a wonderful opportunity to be here. They're looking at it like, oh, it's a horrible, burdensome chore, because they've been stuck here for a long time. They've been stuck here for many, many lifetimes. They've been stuck here even like they feel like they've watched every movie and they've done everything and they've learned every lesson and they're still stuck here. And that is not what our experience is supposed to be like. So to contrast, in the antediluvian culture, we got a body and we're able to occupy it and be happy and healthy and non-decrepit for hundreds or maybe even thousands of years if you wanted to. Then when you were bored, you had done everything that you were ready, that you had come here to do and accomplished all of your accomplishments, then you were ready to transcend this level of existence and go somewhere else and do something else. And what's happened instead is consciousness comes into this realm and then it keeps on having to, run on the hamster wheel, run in circles. Like this is called, I think, running on the karmic wheel and things like that. And I'm not espousing that. I'm just saying, like, I recognize it is described in various earth mythologies. It's recognized that people are like trudging along, like, oh, still running on the wheel. It's not supposed to be that way. And this is the 1% of enslavement or lack of freedom that is stinky to the entire system. It's like you can't just sit in a room being perfectly happy when there's a big pile of poop over in the corner because it's stinky and it stinks up the whole room. So this stinkiness of the slavery or lack of freedom that is here on this planet and other planets too, it stinks up the whole joint. And that is part of my motivation for wanting to rectify the situation. That this stinkiness directly, constrains me and affects me. Because it's like a trapeze. You get the trapeze where one guy swings and the other guy catches him and then he swings on over and the third guy catches him. And if one of those guys is out of place or is not in the right rhythm to catch the next guy, then the whole thing falls down, or like relay runners or something like that. So in terms of consciousness flowing and DNA doing its free dance, this energy is supposed to flow along. It's supposed to be like this goes to this guy, and then this guy switches and goes to this guy, and then it flips on over and goes to this guy. And if one of those guys isn't there to do its consciousness maneuver, the entire system gets weakened. And that's the stench that I'm talking about. So there's lots of stenchliness that is affecting the entire cosmos. And when I say cosmos, I'm talking about all timelines everywhere, not just one particular version of the universe, but all of the layers of possibility and probability that make up the entire, tapestry of time. Okay, back to the flying rainbow lasagna. So the flying rainbow lasagna was my spontaneous solution to not only how to solve the difficulty of one particular individual journey and individual body, but also solving and resolving this duality that we've been experiencing across the entire cosmos. So this is how real magic is done. This is how, real ethical transformations are done. It's not like you stand outside of the system and say, oh, I've got a great idea. I'll, wave my magic wand and poof, that guy down there is going to change. It's like, no, if you want to change the system, you get embodied. You come into the system and you actually change it from within. And that is what I did. I took the genetic material, like the vibrating strings of DNA within this one human female body, and I made it vibrate in a higher dimensional context, like taking a flat piece of paper and folding it into an origami shape. And by doing that, the body itself didn't have to die. There was not the necessity of physical mortality. And also, consciousness had greater degrees of freedom in terms of where it could go. So that's just like saying, if you are a little ant or a caterpillar, you can only walk on the surface of a leaf. and it takes the transformation into becoming a butterfly or the adult winged form to be able to either jump off the surface of the leaf and fly to a different part of it or fly to a different flower completely. And we are all heading towards that adult form of our consciousness. It's actually inevitable. So back in ancient Atlantis, everybody ascended. Nobody died. Death is the aberration or the thing that is not supposed to exist. Here it is presented as an inevitability. Everybody dies, and that's just the way it goes. And that's like a software program that gets implanted into everybody's mind, and then it affects how your physical body actually lives and moves through time. Like the expectation of inevitable death affects your cellular structure. So no, death is not inevitable. What was inevitable in the ancient world, this is everybody was immortal or eternal beings, was this metamorphosis that I define as ascension. So ascension is not the Christian rapture, and it's different than what many people in the New Age community are describing, like a type of escapism. It's a transformation. It's a transformation where the fuel of your physical, dense body is used to cause the leap of consciousness from one rung of the ladder to the next rung of the ladder, like to get out of this level of perception and density into the next highest level of greater perception and lower density, like climbing upward out of density and going towards pure light. Light being consciousness or information or awareness. Like when I say light, you could think of it as being synonymous with the light that is in a fiber optic cable, that you can carry information, you can transmit information via light. And the truth is, that's what the sun and the stars and the stellar network are doing all the time. So looping back around to my impetus for this broadcast, I'm not a human consciousness. I am a stellar consciousness in a human body. And this is the whole idea. I created a genetic portal. This is like the level of quote unquote technology that myself or others like me use. It's a concept. And it's not just a concept written on a piece of paper. It's a concept embodied in my body. My genes are doing this dance. They're doing this behavior. So that means that it's like you can find notebooks where I've written about this, but even if you burned all the notebooks or got rid of all of the paintings, there would still be my body. And this is actually true of everyone who's got, a body and got DNA. Your DNA is analogous to the blockchain, this new crypto blockchain technology, where it's like a record that stores everything that you've ever experienced or been exposed to or thought or did. And that it's also a record for things from a very ancient time. And it's also a record of potentiality for what will manifest into the future. So yeah, there's again, science has not explored the profound depth of possibilities of what is actually contained in DNA. It's until science is prepared to even look into the behavior of consciousness, it's not prepared to what it's going to find. Just drinking some water here. So my consciousness comes from the stars. However, I'm here in this physical, human body. And so that means that I have a stake, like a vested interest in what is going on in this realm. I'm not some kind of an outsider. I'm not some kind of an opportunist. I actually care very much about this place. So to use the analogy, it's like if you as a person in the United States decided to move to France and you're going to, buy a little house or build a little place to live there, and you live there for 17 years, it's like you care about whether they're dumping toxic waste in France. You care about what the politics of France are like. You care about what the food of France is like. You care about whether there's medicine. Like, you live there. You care about that place, and you care about the other people that are your neighbors and the other plants and animals that are around you, because that's where you live. That's how I feel about Earth. Like when I came here into this body, I was like such a newcomer and I had to learn so many things about human society and about the way that the ecosystem works here, and like all of those things. I had to learn it all firsthand too, about food and nutrition and microbes in your tummy. I had to learn about all of that. At this point, I'm firmly invested in being here. It's like I've lived here for 17 years, and so I've faced all of the challenges that a regular human embodied since birth faces. Like I've had to figure out how to get money and how to pay rent and how to have health insurance and how to have car insurance. Like, oh my God, like I can't even describe to you how much it has been culture shock or like my burden of disbelief at having to figure out all these things. I had to figure out how to pay taxes, like all of these silly paperwork things. I had to figure them out. Like you can't just skate through. You got to have your paperwork together. That was one of the things that I learned, like paperwork matters around here. So I had to learn about all these different things. So that means that, yes, my value system is not synonymous with everybody's value system here. And my origins and my consciousness come from a different place. However, I'm totally in solidarity with all of the struggles that everyone who is what we would call, like a natural citizen or, original inhabitant, everybody who's indigenous here. If you were born in France, we have the same commonalities. We have the same concerns because I live here too. So yes, I've followed earthly politics and I've followed the degradation of the environment and what's happening in terms of chemical contaminants and all the challenges that are here on this planet. They all affect me as much as they affect everyone else. And that's fair, because it's like saying if I were in a higher dimensional realm and I didn't face the challenges of having to have a car and pay for my car insurance and get my oil changed, then it would be easy. Like it wouldn't be a level playing field. It would be like, oh, like Aurora sits on an interdimensional cloud, eating nothing but strawberries and life is so great for her. And they would be like, it's easy. It's easy for you. You're not actually here. So all of this, in order to really do this magic, and it's natural magic, it's not dark magic, it's the antithesis of the satanic technology that distorts the time field. This is natural magic that is based in love that heals the time field. In order for me to do it, I had to come here and be embodied with everyone and face all of the same challenges that all of the humans are facing. So also, like, our environment right now is horribly polluted, not just in terms of like petrochemicals. Like, no, I'm not just talking about your car exhaust. That's so mundane and simple. I'm talking about pollution that affects consciousness. So this pollution is, it's in chemtrails. It's the nanoparticles that are in people's minds and clouding their vision and making it so that they can't see and think and speak clearly. It's the contaminants that are in food, things like fluoride and genetically modified organisms that, again, when they are ingested, lower consciousness. Things like vaccinations and other forms of medical procedures that are literally lowering consciousness or making it so that people have less of a connection to the divine. And then, the financial system and all these other things like media, the advertisements and the things that we see on movies and television, that's a form of pollution. And one of the big ones is electromagnetic fields. So just, prepare for incoming rant. Like the idea that people would utilize apparatuses in their homes that make these electromagnetic fields or, radio frequency fields that are affecting not only their physical, biological, cellular health, but they're also affecting their consciousness. They don't understand why illness is happening. It's exactly like Europe of 600 years ago. And they're like, we don't understand why all these people are keeling over and dying. It's because microorganisms are jumping off of the rats and jumping off of the fleas and jumping onto your body and giving you death. And around here, it's like, oh, people don't understand. Like, why are they getting cancer? Why are they getting fibromyalgia? Why are they getting this? Why are they getting that? It's like, because you're surrounded by a bunch of invisible, harmful fields that are the direct result of the technology that you're using. So there's huge problems with the pollution of electromagnetic fields that are surrounding humanity right now. And that's one of the things that troubles me so much about the scientific community, that very few people in the scientific community are coming forward and saying, wait, we should research before we roll out and deploy what type of an impact not only Wi-Fi and cell phone towers are having on humanity, but all of these different types of apparatuses that emit a field. Everything from a microwave to unshielded electrical wiring to smart meters. I mentioned cell phones and routers inside of your house. Like, all of these things are emitting fields that are directly affecting the field that surrounds and interpenetrates your body. That's like divine intelligence. It's anti-divine is the best way that I can put it. And I'm truly horrified when I think about the level of unconsciousness that is leading to this pervasive level of electromagnetic pollution. And, whatever. There are some people that are very objective materialist based, rational-minded skeptics, and unfortunately a lot of them are property owners, and they don't even recognize how the smart meters and unshielded electrical wires are harming themselves and others. And just whatever. In my own life, I faced one skeptic like that many years ago, and it wasn't until they actually got one of these little meters, because they're all like, oh no, that's just a bunch of new age nonsense, that this smart meter is bad for me, and or turning off your Wi-Fi at night, or putting your cell phone out of your bedroom. Like, they thought I was crazy because I used to do that. And then years later, they're like, oh yeah, I got one of these meters, and I started checking the appliances around the house, and Wi-Fi is terrible for you. And I'm like, that's awesome that it took you 5 years to figure that out. And I'm happy you came to your awakening. I'm sad that it took 5 years, because think about, you can opt out of smart meters. So this person, they could opt out of their smart meter now that they know that it's something that they need to do. So this is just like getting a microscope. The first guy that ever invented the microscope and said, look, there's little tiny bugs crawling on everybody, and this is what's making you sick. That, what a realization that was. So this is a similar level of realization. So it's not by accident. All of this assault that is happening. It's not like, oops, sorry, I stepped on your toes, I didn't mean to. It's actually quite intentional. So, I'm almost at the end of this broadcast, but yeah, there are malevolent consciousness invaders that have come to this planet over 10,000 years ago. They not only invaded the human genome, they set up what is considered to be human civilization. They incepted it. So the structure of government, the structure of banking and the economy, the structure of social dynamics, the structure of religion across the ages, everything from ancient Sumeria to present Judeo-Christianity, it's all been created by the oppressors of humanity. They know exactly what they're doing. With 5G, this improved, faster, more pervasive cell phone and Wi-Fi signal, what they're calling the Internet of Things. It's ridiculous. It's not because of any consumer demand. It's not because anybody says, oh, I really need my blender to be able to talk to my cell phone. There's no reason in the world for that. And actually, most people that I speak to are highly skeptical, based in science fiction movies. There was this old one, I don't remember what it was called, but it was like machines take over, and all of a sudden, the cars are driving themselves, and blenders are blending things on their own. There's tons of science fiction movies where machines take over, and I joke, they have these electronic dog treat dispensers if you're at work all day and you want to press a button and give your dog a treat long distance, and it's like, oh, when machines take over, they're going to overfeed your dog too many treats. But this lighthearted, and I try to be lighthearted about these things because I don't want everyone to be horribly depressed, but it's the truth. But okay, and I think last week I was talking about AI and the terrestrial technosphere, and I got to the end and I was a bit cut off. So yeah, I'm not a demonic apologist. I'm not a transhumanist at all. And also, what has happened on this planet is the terrestrial technosphere, the collection of all technology that humanity has created in order to compensate for its own loss of natural higher faculties. At this point again, I'll have to speak about this in the future. Thank you very much for being with me on the journey. Please keep dancing like flying rainbow lasagnas.